Well, excited to have you all back. Just wanted to check in and see like how many folks were on. I apologize, I wasn't, but how many folks were on to watch the TED Talk with us this morning? I want to get kind of a handle on how many people. So Laura, okay. And how many of us were able to watch it ahead of time, if not this morning? Okay, a couple people, awesome, great, thank you. Okay, well, definitely recognizing and acknowledging that we are going to continue to increase the arc of work that we give in preparation for our meeting so that we can really maximize this time together. So thank you for folks who are able to protect that time. We're going to get started here. Just wanted to do a quick overview and recognize that this work is just another season in our lives, and so we'll continue to host meetings for this particular group of folks here through March 23rd of 2021. So just wanting to acknowledge that our time together is limited and wanting to keep us really rooted and focused in our results. So as we continue to meet, we're going to continue to focus on increasing our accountability, which really means understanding what's going on in our systems and being able to activate ourselves as it relates to those things. Continue to develop shared measurement. So as we're doing this work in the community, we want to be measuring the work that we're doing so that we can be able to acknowledge those outputs and outcomes, those changes because of the work that we're doing together. Continue to come and participate and connect and communicate with one another. And of course, continuous improvement. Also want to acknowledge that in between this time, the Backbone is working on putting together some more training and development opportunities. We've gotten lots of feedback from you all that it would be nice to have some space to play with these tools, ask deeper questions, and so be looking for emails about that. And then lastly, I just want to remind us of our accountability pathway. We always want to stay on the right side of that, and the first step is acknowledging reality. So if that means you know, tapping someone else in because you're not able to show up today, but just wanting to acknowledge reality and make sure that's the first step as we're doing this work together. Any questions about our meeting series, the date, or purpose of meeting as we continue to move forward? Okay, thank you. For today's results, we've got kind of 3 buckets of work. We're going to start with Gracious Space as we always do. Really excited. We're going to be using the data from the poll that we took on October 6th, and we're going to be unpacking that together to set some targets, which is a new thing, right? We haven't set goals or targets together as it relates to how we're working together. And then lastly, we're going to be giving you some additional time in your focus groups to prepare and create a summary of the strategies or small tested change that you've been doing. And then we're going to be closing out with a cross share. So you'll have an opportunity to share with others in this call on the work that you're doing in your focus groups. Okay, before we do Gracious Space, we're switching things up here a little bit today and wanted to start with the working agreements. I think, as I mentioned, the Backbone is also working on continuous improvement, and we've gathered feedback from you all through this whole process. And because of that, we wanted to offer 2 new working agreements and see if the group would be willing to adopt them. The first one is a pull from the Courageous Conversations Specific Educational Group Work, or BD1, Beyond Diversity 1 or 2, if you're familiar with those names. They use the working agreement, speak from the personal, local, and immediate. Is anybody familiar? I know there's some people in the room who've taken PEG. Kara, do you want to speak to personal, local, and immediate?
Yeah, happy to. Hey guys, I haven't seen y'all in a while, so I just want to say hi. I moved my Tuesday morning meeting so I can attend this more. So happy to be back. Awesome. Okay, personal, local, and immediate really refers to when, at least for, this is my understanding in courageous conversations about race is where this is going to come from. When you're having courageous conversations about race, that the stories you tell and the information you give should be your own. You shouldn't be speaking for others or telling their stories. So that is, you know, personal part of it. Local and immediate, that's just like speak your truth sort of thing, you know, that it's yours, don't speak for others. Be listening, of course, and that's a whole different agreement there, but speak for yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Cara. And I'm so glad to see you back and appreciative that you were able to make those adjustments to be here with us. Does anybody else want to offer another perspective on this, or does the group feel like any clarifying questions? I'm not seeing any big gestures. I would also offer, just in my role as a facilitator, this is one of the ways that you all can help me facilitate really rich, equitable conversations. I think one of the cool things about speaking from a personal, local, immediate, as well as what Cara was adding around being curious and listening to other perspectives, is if you're mindful of speaking from your personal, local, immediate, it's much easier to create space and hold space for another perspective, right? Like, if I don't think that I'm responsible for speaking for everybody or using universal thinking, it really creates space for other voices. And so that selfishly, that really helps me as a facilitator. It makes my job easy. So I'm really excited about this one. So I'm just going to ask by like show of hands, like who can adopt this working agreement. You can also use the reaction tool, and feel free to, okay, awesome. And if you're not able to, thank you. If you're not able to adopt it, I'd love to hear from you. Some thumbs up. Awesome, thank you. Okay. And then I'm going to add one more recommendation here on a working agreement. And this is really technical, but I think it's really important. It's around communicating often. And I don't want to undermine the fact that you all have been doing phenomenal work in between these calls, but I just really want to call that out for us as a whole, is communicating often, before, during, and after. And I think that's really important for you. It's really important for the work that you're doing. And it's also really important for this partnership, making sure people understand what's happening before, so that they have an opportunity to be a part of it. People understand what's happening during the process, so that it's easier to bring them along. And then communicating afterwards. So that might look like information given is an information owed, right? So if you reach out to someone and ask them for their story, it's important to reach back and say thank you and let them know the impact that that had on the work or the impact that it had on you. Does anybody want to add anything to communicate before, during, and after? Or any clarifying questions? Okay, so can I just get another show of hands if you're able to adopt this, or you can use the reaction tool? Seeing some thumbs up, some high fives. Awesome, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Seeing the quick scan, awesome, thank you. And then lastly, if you're on social media, another technical thing, love to invite you to use these hashtags. It makes it easy for our team to pull together. So if there's an event that you're hosting because of this work, if there's some content that you're putting out there, it's helpful if you use these hashtags so that we can help pull that and share it with our partners. Also know that we're working really hard on your back to help support you and make sure that you have the support that you need. And this is a really simple way to help us aggregate all that information on the giant interweb. So just a little plug here. Okay. And before I move on, just going to ask if there's one or two working agreements that folks want to lean into today. What do you need? What are you going to ask your peers for? What's something that, like a stretch goal for you, or something that's going to help you stay at the table today? You can do that in the chat, or I can invite someone to unmute themselves. One working agreement folks can lean into today.
Kalika, I can say something on that. I think it's really important that we center on those who are impacted. And so that's something that as we work on our documents and work together as a team, that I would like to really think about who those people are and how we can really center them.
Awesome, thank you, Monica. I'm going to also lift up Carol in the chat here, offering established shared language. So I'm going to invite all of us to be mindful of that and carry that through with us as we continue our meeting today.
And Kalika, I just wanted to,
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I also was planning looking at centering on those who are impacted, but really making sure they're part of the work that we're doing, and that we're not just hearing the problems and then figuring out how to fix them, but like really working with them on how to fix them, and centering them in the work instead of just centering them in the solutions.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate that differentiation. Thank you. Okay. And again, acknowledging that that means not what's happening on this call, right? Those people that we're speaking of aren't on this call. And so just wanting to like name the obvious here. Okay, one last working thing before we move to Gracious Space, and I'm going to quickly move us from here. We would like to invite you today to use the Zoom function around your name. And if you could either add the letter B for BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color, or W for White. We're asking you to do that today because in our Gracious Space, we're going to be breaking out into racial affinity groups. Because this group isn't as racially diverse, we are going to be doing this binary between BIPOC and white. So if you could go into your the Zoom function, click those three dots or ellipses and rename yourself to include either the letter B or W so that Vicki can move you into breakouts. This is really important so that we're not assuming or guessing what your racial identity is. Also, if you'd like to include your pronouns, you can do so as well. And I'm going to make sure that I am practicing what I preach. So I'm just going to quickly do that as well. Okay. Thank you all for doing that. If that's challenging, you're welcome to also do that in the chat box. Okay. So one little housekeeping item here is that we would like to invite you all to be a part of the Backbone's continuous improvement process. We, as I continue to mention, are constantly getting feedback from you all through our polls, through one-on-one conversations. And after our meeting on November 3rd, we're going to keep the call open a little bit longer for 30 minutes, and we're going to be having a continuous improvement feedback session. If you are ready and willing to help us do that process, invite you to add that additional time on your calendar. And the idea is that we'll be using a process called situation, behavior, and impact. And that'll provide you an opportunity to let the Backbone know what this process has been like for you and the impact that it's had on you. Okay, enough of my talking, enough of the framing and technical stuff. Really excited to do Gracious Space. This morning or sometime before today, you were able to watch a TED Talk by Hassan Kwame Jeffries. And I just want to pull up this one line here, or summary from his talk, where he spoke to the need to weave historical context, no matter how painful, into our understanding of modern society, so we can disrupt the continuum of inequality. This is really important, I think, especially now as we're getting ready to continue to strengthen our small tests of change, to deploy strategies to continue problem solving with the community. It's really important to also be mindful of looking back and understanding the historical context. And I also want to, and Peyton, I really appreciate you pushing me on this, being mindful that a lot of times when we talk about the historical context, we have a tendency to think nationally or hundreds of years ago, but how can we be courageous enough to talk about what's happening now and how those systems continue to impact us now and locally as well. So in just a moment, we're going to be moving you into your breakout groups. I'm going to put the questions here in the chat box so that you can have them with you. We're going to be moving you into trios. Any questions on these? Okay. Okay, Vicki, when you're ready, I'll have you move us into breakout. Well, welcome back, everybody. Everybody seems pretty calm, so I'm assuming nobody had really high heat conversations. Love to hear just from like one group from the BIPOC and one group of, or pod, if you will, of white leaders on what you talked about in your group.
Hi, this is Angie from Centro Cultural Mexicano. Alma Gonzalez and I were in a group together. and we talked about just visibility of the Latino community and how historically we have kind of been ignored and invisible, and so it was interesting to speak with Alma and talk about how both of our organizations work a lot on just visibility in the community, not only reaching out directly to our community, but also being visible to the greater community, because it's really important to just acknowledge and recognize that our communities are here and everywhere, and we're neighbors, and we're we're everywhere. And so we both felt it was our organizations do spend a lot of time on that aspect of our work, and then direct outreach as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate that framing of like acknowledging the historical context of how your community has been treated and seen or heard or lack thereof, and then how you're actively working to dismantle that locally. And I loved also the framing of like within our community and then in the larger context as well. I think that was really powerful. Thank you, Angie. And then wanted to hear from one of our white trios on just kind of a summary, quick summary of your breakout. We might have to like play Not It or something. Thank you, Kara. Thank you, Tammy, for playing along. I'm gonna invite Jamie. I see Jamie on my screen. What'd your group talk about?
We talked a little bit about how to remember, like I had said, to center the people that you're trying to work with and why you're trying to work with them. I talked a little bit about, like, in our organization, we talk about the history of like, why have we done things the way that we've done them before, and what could we be doing differently, and why have we been centering things the way that we've been centering them. And then I talked a little bit about the work that we are doing with the remote learning group, and how we are focusing on centering the Latinx voices at this moment in time, and how can we continue to help raise them up and work with them.
Thank you, Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to invite you all to just take this with you, not only in your focus groups, but just in your day-to-day, like just taking a moment often to think about systems are designed to produce outcomes that they do, right? And just knowing that, like, there's so many moments where like you could just be walking to the grocery store and take a moment of mindfulness on, like, you know, I often think about like, why is there an ethnic section? Like the ketchup and the salsa don't want to hang out together, right? Like there's silly things like that that I might just bring my attention to, and think about, you know, why do my hair care products have their own section on a completely different aisle, Peyton, thank you, versus being with all the other shampoo? Like, is it for ease of access? I don't know, but I just want to invite you to, like, as you're moving through your world and day, think about what are the systems at play here, and like, who decided that? Because I think that's a really great practice as adaptive leaders. So I'm going to start moving us into the high-paced part of our meeting today. We're going to go through a rapid cycle over the next 20 minutes here, and I'm going to invite Peyton to join me. And the idea here is that we're going to ask you to flex some serious muscles. We're going to choose something that might be a little bit uncomfortable, but I believe in you. We're going to do it 6 times in a row. So by the time we get through this, it's going to be great. I promise you. The idea here is today we're going to use proposal-based decision-making, which essentially says we're going to be reviewing some information. We're going to ask people to say, yeah, thumbs up, I can get behind that. Or if it's like, maybe not really, but if we tweak it, and then thumbs down is like, I can't get behind that. If you're a thumbs down or a thumbs to the sideways, I'm going to ask you to modify that thing so that you can get behind it. And the idea essentially is it's a quick way for the group to set a goal or a target, and then everybody to quickly say, like, yeah, I can get behind that. The content that we're going to be reviewing is the poll data from the October 6th meeting. In just a moment, Peyton's going to be sharing that with you just so you can get a high level on it. And then ultimately, our task is going to be, A, to check for shared language. And I think it was Carol who lifted that up as a working agreement to lean in today. And then to set a target. So your pre-meeting work was to think about each of those 6 performance measures and set a personal target. Now we're going to set a target for the group. And then lastly, we're going to close out that cycle by setting an action commitment. So for example, if I want to have a 6-pack by next week, I might make an action commitment to lay off the M&Ms and do crunches for an hour every day. It's unrealistic. I'm not going to have a 6-pack by next week, but you can kind of see the goal. Okay, so I'm going to move us really quickly. I said this already. This is going to be fast and serious, but we're going to make it through together. Peyton.
Thank you, Kalika. Fast and the Furious is one of my favorite movie chains, by the way. So before I move through this, I know we have a lot of numbers and graphs here. These are the graphs representing the data, again, that you all provided for us a couple weeks ago. And because we're moving quickly, there's a lot here. I'm about to drop in the chat the Google Sheet, so you can actually look at these with a little, kind of on your own pace when we move to the next slides. But really, just wanted to remind us that these answers were given in response to the work that you all feel that you are doing within your focus groups. And I'm not going to go through the answers really or the questions. The goal here that we want for you all within your focus groups is moving in the direction of that arrow to the left, so that everyone can be very confident in what's happening within their focus groups. The majority of the graphs, as you'll see, the high water mark usually is somewhat confident. And I know that we spoke about this as the backbone. We appreciate that honesty. I think that it really speaks to a growing understanding of the work, that we're not all the way there. We're beyond unknowing, but we are moving into a space of kind of understanding what we do and do not know. I will highlight in the bottom right corner, we have our old friend, the 2x2 performance measure grid. And what's highlighted there in yellow, the early warning signs, how well we're working together differently. That really is a representation of what these pieces of data are providing, how well you all are working together in your focus groups different. Again, I'm going to, Kalika, feel free to move to the next slide. And folks, don't get stuck on the numbers. They are in that Google Sheet if you're curious. And again, this is really the next 3 questions, but the concept is the same. We want to move everyone to the right so that you understand what is happening. And I will point out that there's one question that talks about adaptive, and there's one question that talks about technical solutions. And I would contend that, we want to make sure that there are adaptive solutions, but technical solutions are also important to kind of move the work forward along with adaptive solutions. So, and at the bottom, I want to make sure that folks see themselves as a critical stakeholder in their group as well. And again, these are really representations of how well you're working together. Making sure that as we move forward to how much work is being done. So the percentage of things that are happening, the number of, transactional things that are happening, the events that are happening, how well are you all working together differently in these groups to push those things along? Again, the performance measure down in the bottom right is that highlight. I know we are highlighting it, but it does exist in a continuum. And as we move through from that bottom right, the better off, to difference made, to how well, to then how much, just want to make sure that we recognize where we are and what this data is showing us. So again, it's showing you how well you are working together differently. I'll ask, I know that was a lot, but again, the data is in that Google spreadsheet. So I will ask Kalika to move us on again. All right, so I will use this for, just again, I'll explain this briefly, and please, within the chat, or you can verbally unmute, you can unmute yourself and just ask kind of any questions that you have as we move forward.
Peyton, I do want to let the group know that because it's not on screen, I did put the process in the chat box if again. So just a reminder, on each of these, we're going to check for understanding, make sure everybody's on the same page around what that thing is. We're going to ask someone to offer like a target for the group, and then we're going to check to see if the group can adopt it. And then lastly, going to take a pause for each of you to journal down something you can do to help move towards that. Okay, so that's in the chat box if you missed it. Thanks, Peyton. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no worries. Thank you for that explanation. Really, the only thing I wanted to say here was the only thing that I did fill out was that left-hand column, the COVID response can performance measure. And what really we see here are the percentages and numbers of you who felt very confident in your answers. That is not to say that that the goal is for everyone to always feel very confident. I just wanted to point out that was the measuring stick I chose to use. And with the data that we have, we can choose different measuring sticks, and that really is going to be up to you all. But I just want to, this is not to say that everyone needs to always be very confident. It's a good goal to have, and along the way, you know, we can all become confident. But again, these are the performance measures, again, that I chose. So I'm actually going to kind of allow you all to look at this and reflect back on the data, which is in that Google Sheet, as we begin, as Kalika begins to lead us through this process of proposal-based decision making.
Okay, I hope y'all are ready. Again, don't worry about the numbers. This is an iterative process. This will change. We're going to continue to revisit this. And as Peyton said, ultimately, while you all have goals and targets out in the community in your 5 areas of focus that are in the chat box, we are also holding goals for how we're working together to live differently, like how adaptive are our challenges, how equitable are the work that we're doing. So I'm going to invite someone just to, is there any clarifying questions around or a working definition around what is it? The first one here around the group, you reported that you feel very confident that your focus group knows the key factors in your area of focus. So the first couple months that we spent in our focus groups, it was around what's the current state? What are the things that are driving the current state? Okay, I'm seeing everybody kind of, some folks nodding their head. That's not, okay. So we're all on the same page about what a key factor is. So does someone want to throw out like a target, like as a group, what % of you do you want to feel very confident in knowing the key factors in your areas of focus? You can use the chat box or someone can unmute themselves. I also want to highlight the fact that like this might feel uncomfortable because we have a tendency not to highlight the process, right? And we've talked a lot about like in our day-to-day jobs, we get tracked, evaluated on outputs and outcomes, not so much the process. So this is an opportunity to slow down and acknowledge that a part of this is the process. Thank you, Kathy. I'm hearing Kathy, I'm reading Kathy setting a goal for 85% of you feel very confident that you understand what's driving the current state in your focus group. Can you all adopt that? Anybody who can't? I'm seeing some heads nodding. 85%. Okay, some thumbs up. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next one. Thank you. So the next one is 19% of you reported feeling very confident that your focus group has developed actions creating equity. So does someone want to offer like what that means to you? What does it mean that your focus group is creating actions that create equity? Looking for someone. Sue, what would that mean to you? Oh, Chris, I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, you always suck me into these things, I guess so. I would say that in the remote learning group, we are confident that our focus group has developed actions creating equity because we are really trying to center the Latinx community on our work and really kind of took that last month to take a deep dive into what that looks like. Is that what you wanted?
This is what it means to you, right? Like, because if whatever this means to you is what you're going to do out in the world. That's why it's important for me not to tell you what I think about this, right? Because you don't get to take me everywhere with you unless you're going for coffee or to pet puppies. So thank you for that, Chris. It's really important that like you and your focus groups are on the same page around what does it mean to create equity? Because like if creating equity means doing things on behalf of people to one person in your group and another person, it means sharing power, how mutually reinforcing are the activities that you're doing, right? So it's really important for us to take this time to make sure we're on the same page. What does it mean that the actions you're taking in your group are creating equity? I heard Chris say that it's about centering a particular group and ensuring that you're partnering with them to create solutions. Okay. I'm seeing Carol say that we are involving the people who are impacted by our work. Okay. I would just offer to answer your question, Chris, for me, it means equity means shared power. And that's what it means to me. Like I have to be in a place where the way that I'm working shares power. Does someone want to offer a target for the group on like how, as a group, by March of 2021, where do you all want to be? How confident do you all want to be as it relates to feeling that your actions are leading to equity? And I want to offer like this information is important also because it's going to help the backbone determine what tools and resources we bring to you and how we spend this time together. Someone just make up a number. I believe in you. 90%. Okay. Can you guys get behind Liz's recommendation around 90%? I see one thumbs up. I see another thumbs up. Okay. Is there anybody that's like, absolutely not, no, it's not going to happen?
I see one.
Kathy. I see one. Kathy, say more.
As much as I would like it to be 90%, I think that we have to admit as a community that we are so rooted in inequitable solutions that it's really hard to get to equity, full equity by March 2021. So and thinking about where we're very confident, and also too, sometimes we choose solutions, even if we're co-creating with diverse communities, we go towards solutions that don't really get at that equity, just because it's layers that we have to pull back to get to true equity where we would feel very confident. So I just think that 90% might be a little high, even though I want it to be there. So I think we have to be really honest with ourselves that this is a really difficult area for us to get to quickly.
Thank you, Kathy. So can I ask you to make a recommendation?
Of course you can ask me that. I would say 80%.
Okay.
80%, and I'm also confident it's 80% very confident. I would hope that a lot of people would be confident. It's just that very confident is where I think 80% would be a better number.
I actually have a comment and follow up to, this is Carol, and follow up to Kathy's comment. I don't even know that I'm quite comfortable with 80%, and the reason is it feels like in the low number here that currently exists, part of it is that we're all on a journey, and with a high level of confidence that we've developed actions creating equity feels like we solved the problem. And I think with regard to equity, we need to be sitting in our discomfort that there's much we don't know, and that that it would be great if more than half of us were feeling like we were on the right path, but it also feels good to think that around half of us also thinks we need to explore our whether we've done enough. So I would actually put the number more towards 50%, frankly.
Did I hear 50?
Yes.
Carol? Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Before I wrap this one, I'm going to invite a person of color for your perspective around what do you think is possible and what does this mean to you? Because I do want to notice that, like, when I said, can I get thumbs up? I saw two of the people who gave thumbs up were people of color. Angie, I just saw you gesture again.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just comment why I gave a thumbs up. So I think that a lot of times around equity, it becomes a conversation that kind of goes on and on and on and on. And my view on the 90% was that if we are forced to develop actions, we will. If we are forced to hold ourselves to making an action statement or an action, then we will learn from that, and then we will make another step. And then out of those two steps, we'll learn from that, and we'll keep making steps. I read this as developing actions, creating equity. We're never going to fully be there. We're never going to get there. But if we don't have a strong goal to do something definitive, then it becomes just this rolling conversation that goes on and on and on and on. So that's why I was kind of pro the 90%, because I think it'll hold us to making a commitment to act.
Thank you, Angie. And so I'm going to also lean in as a Black person and say that I too share your perspective, Angie, that I think setting aggressive targets is a forcing function for action, right? And I think that's the nature of how all leadership works. If you set a target that feels unobtainable, I think it puts a little fire underneath you. I can also offer, in my experience around seeing when things happened, I too felt like when we had a culture that said like, oh, nobody has a handle on this, it invites us to be complacent on those small opportunities to show up differently, right? So I think being mindful of when you use your voice and who's talking and who's not talking is an opportunity to create equity. There's like small little tests of change that we can do that roll up and change the system at large. So I agree with you. So in service of not wanting to take up too much time from your focus breakouts, I'm going to stop here. And I will commit to bring this back so that we can continue to work through and set targets together. I appreciate you leaning into this process. Just to summarize, that we have adopted a 85% goal of very confident as it relates to your groups knowing the key factors in your areas of focus. We have begun to float anywhere between 50 and 90% as it relates to knowing that your group is creating actions that will lead to more equity. So at least we got to play with this practice, and we'll continue to work on this together, because ultimately if we don't have goals and how we're going to work together differently, we're not going to see growth. So I really appreciate everybody leaning into this process and working with us, and we'll bring this back next time. So to move us on, we're going to be moving you into your focus groups in just a moment. Inviting you, if you haven't already, to work in your groups to come up with a 2 to 3 minute summary of the work that you're doing. That could be a summary of your small test and change, or you can use the strategy assessment document that we used last time. And the idea is that you're just going to be coming back and sharing out what's the strategy, what's the small test and change you're doing in your group, what's the current state, so acknowledging the reality. And I think, Kathy, you modeled that really well just a moment ago when you said, like, we acknowledge that our system is designed to create inequity. And then lastly, what's the desired result? What's the Northern Star? So any questions about what you're going to be doing in your focus groups? Preparing a 2 to 3 minute summary. And then when we come back, each group will do a 2 to 3 minute summary, and we're going to use the critical response model again for folks to provide hypotheses or curiosities in response. Okay, awesome. So we're going to send you to your focus groups. I know that this is a high-paced meeting, but that's one of the ways that we create the fire in our bellies, is using time and pace as a forcing function to create some heat and energy. And so know that this is by design, that we're going really fast. So we will see you back in a couple minutes. Welcome back. I'm sure that didn't feel short, didn't feel long for you all, but it felt really long for me, so I'm happy to have you back. So I'm going to invite us to really maximize these last 15 minutes together we have, and have each group, don't hesitate, because we're all going to go here. Just wanted to highlight really quickly that our roles here are, if you're not the speaker sharing on behalf of your focus group, you can invite us all to be actively listening and offering any hypotheses or curiosities that you might have. And what's really important about framing it that way is not that you're telling someone what to do, but what's coming up for you that might be a different perspective on what you heard. It might help illuminate some blind spots for folks in either creating some contrast or helping validate and reinforce the direction in which that group is going. So I'm really excited to invite a group to go. Who's ready to go? One of our groups here. I'm not afraid to volunteer. Benjamin, I see you're talking. All right, let's go. Remote.
Okay, so we are remote learning, and our mission is to bring supports to families while remote learning. So then we meet and kind of define who is our target population. So our target population are Latino families with kids in elementary and kinder, from K to 5 basically. And then we kind of said, okay, so what are the issues? So we had no idea. So we went ahead and did a focus group that participated. So another part of our target group is Lake Washington and Bellevue School District parents. And the reason because of this is because of who is in our group. So I thought it would be best way to support these two families since there were representatives, more representatives from these two areas. So from there, we kind of asked the question, so what areas are we gonna cover? We had ideas, but we thought it would be best to hear from the community. So we did a focus group with 7 participants from both districts, and we hear their concerns. The focus group was facilitated in Spanish, and the audience was receiving the information through a interpreter. So with that information, we saw kind of 2 areas of relevance. One is access to information and access to resources. So from there, we kind of decided that the best way that we can do this was to create a video, basically a YouTube in Spanish that will give families from our target groups information that is relevant in their language and that is culturally responsive, and also tools that may help navigate. We understand that this is only the beginning, and but we feel that this will be a great way to keep families informed as we understand better what other ways we can communicate. So through the videos, we try to make a 2-way approach. One, we kind of feed them information, but also we open channels for them to provide feedback and other informations. And hopefully from there, we will be able to collect other ways that we can help them. So from now, this is gonna be a pilot that is gonna happen twice a week. The videos are gonna be 10 minutes, 15 minutes max, are gonna be very concise, very informative, and very relevant. And they're gonna go probably until the end of the school year. We're thinking Thanksgiving, probably December, but we're not sure about that yet. Did I miss anything? No, 30 seconds. Should I keep talking? Just, no, that's it, okay.
That's great, thank you so much. And I stopped, I didn't start the timer on time either, so thank you for that summary. Gonna give us just like, right, round of applause. Gonna give folks just a moment to offer something that you're curious about, some hypotheses, like things that you think what do you think the impact of this might be? And don't be afraid to give critical feedback either, right? We wanna help strengthen this group's work. You may have tried something like this and it may have worked, it may not have worked. So just gonna give us a moment to give some feedback in the chat box here. And as we do that, I'm going to invite a group to get ready to share out. And remember, if you're a part of this group, your job right now is to be reading the chat box. Don't defend it, don't protect it, just be reading what the feedback that you're getting, and take this as an opportunity to help grow and strengthen your strategy.
Yeah, so great. So I see a question. I wonder how other community groups, organizations can help in these efforts. So a couple of the things that we are seeing first is if there is resources or information that you have that are directed to our target population, please contact our group, and we'll make sure to include these tools, information, and resources in our videos. We cannot, yeah, we'll try our best to include everybody's voice, but really what we want to do, since it's such a small time, we want to be as intentional as practical as possible. So that's kind of like the only kind of filter that we may have, right? So yeah, that's number one. And the other thing is, we were talking.
Hey, Benjamin, I'm so sorry that I'm gonna have to cut you, because we have to make sure that every group gets a chance to report out, but thank you for that. And I'll make sure that you guys get more time. I'm so sorry to do that.
Not a problem.
I hate doing it, but I do have to make space for the next
I understand.
group. So
no problem.
Who's gonna go next? Funding, I'm gonna pick on funding.
I'm Kathy Abbott. I'm part of the funding group. So in the funding group are municipal funders, large funders, private funders, and also nonprofits who are looking to serve diverse communities. And our kind of key factor that we settled on in this very, very big sphere is to address the barriers that are experienced by BIPOC, PET-led, and embedded groups. We were specifically centered on the Latinx organizations. So we're addressing those barriers that are experienced by Latinx organizations in order to receive funding so that they can deliver community-based support and services. First, we acknowledge there's lots of work going on in different ways, both locally and statewide, to address this issue of equitable funding. But we really ended up with almost 2 tests of change. The first test is to really look at one existing body of work with Debbie Lacey with Eastside for All, is already kind of convening the local cities around how they are making their grant processes accessible. And so we as a funding group are going to be kind of listening in on those sessions in order to support efforts to make those grant processes in the cities more equitably accessible. The other area, because we're kind of waiting on that that opportunity, is the other area we're talking about is we really recognize, because this is a very white dominant culture system, and we have this system of nonprofits that are very, very cumbersome to operate, that our community-based organizations, BIPOC-led organizations, sometimes it's a big barrier just to operate a nonprofit. And how do we ensure that those organizations on the East Side are supported? So we are looking at maybe bringing in some supports and services around supporting those organizations with tools that they might need. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Kathy, and thank you on behalf of the funding group. Going to take just like 30 seconds here to invite people to offer any curiosities or hypotheses around the impact or the potential, or any experience that you might have that you want to share in the chat box for this group. And it looks like food will be ready to go next. Okay, not seeing much in the chat box. If this feels out of scope for you, then I think that's a really good feedback as well. Like if this is not something that a table that you're traditionally at, I know that that usually comes up for me when I think about funding. It's not a table that I'm traditionally sitting at. So. All right, so I'm gonna invite someone from food who's not Tammy, because Tammy usually speaks on behalf of the food group. So I'm gonna invite someone who's not Tammy to speak on behalf of the food group. And I do have Tammy's permission to say that, by the way. I'm not just being a bully. So someone for the food group.
I don't know if Betsy's still here because she said she had to jump off. Tammy can correct me if I'm wrong. And oh, by the way, this is Helena Stevens with the City of Bellevue. So there was 3 of us, and we talked about Kirkland coming into the larger table. This was Betsy's first meeting. We were very glad to hear from her. We talked a great deal about not only using standard forms of how we address food access to our communities, but also looking at how we need to be more creative in solving some of our food problems. So if people have access to food and yet entities are turning food down because they don't have refrigeration trucks or they don't have places where they can get picked up, or agencies are being overloaded, how do we begin to address looking at different ways that we can toss that question and it becomes a community problem and with a community solution, and to be able to think broader than just standard food banks or school districts or agencies that serve food now, but to change our way of thinking to approach solutions, and how it's really critical to have a broad group of players who bring a wide variety of resources to the table in order to address those issues. So we began to talk a great deal about that and how to expand that with Kirkland, along with, and this is my own plug, about keeping data on food access, who needs it, and making sure that we're expanding it to get an accurate picture so we're not limited in our resources, and we change the perspective that people have about the fact that Eastside has enough influence to take care of our own problem, which we don't, and therefore we tend to lose out on opportunities for grants and resources because people think that we have enough food and we can take care of all of our people, which isn't true. So those are basically the things we talked about. Tammy, you can say if I missed anything.
Thank you, Helena. I'm going to invite us to lean into the chat box and offer any hypotheses or curiosities. And again, like if you don't have any questions, that could be something as well, right? Like maybe you're learning as you're listening. Maybe you're hearing things that information that you haven't heard before, and that's also one of the benefits of this process. Yeah. As folks are offering content in the chat box, I'm going to ask that the well-being group be ready to share. Okay, I'm going to ask someone, and I know we're over on time, but hopefully we can stay on just for 3 more minutes so that the well-being group can share. Someone from well-being, please.
I think our discussion, as I mentioned earlier in the chat, is a little harder because of how we have to approach this whole discussion. We're doing a lot of networking, trying to figure out how to get the resources out there. We know that there's many organizations that have places for the people to access help, but people aren't accessing the help. and Helena helped us get phone numbers out to the city of Bellevue. One thing we talked about was how do we get information out about maybe online support chat groups, but it's it's not, you know, as far as the barriers and the racial, we're trying to just get the information out there and kind of normalize it and destigmatize the fact that people, whether it be with disability, racial, whatever, to say I need support and to get it. And we're finding we can disseminate the information, but for people to actually reach out is the challenge. And so that's the one we're continuing to address.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy. So I'm going to invite people to provide any supports, hypotheses, or curiosities in the chat box. And we'll be sure to get this information back to you all so that you can have time to really ingest and read it. Thank you for the additional time on our call. We know that today's meeting was a huge rapid cycle, but as we're closing out, I just want to remind us and acknowledge the progress that's been made to date. We started convening this group just to respond to the immediate need, right? Like the world changed overnight, it seems, as we moved into quarantine. And we spent a lot of time working together in a rapid cycle to provide the technical solutions. And then as we continue to meet, we're looking further upstream. You all have worked really hard to self-organize into areas of focus, to look at data to understand, as Helena said so well just a moment ago, what's the real picture, an accurate picture of what's happening in our community. And then we're continuing to have courageous conversations about what is the current state and what are those levers or key factors. And now we're working on those strategies, really honing in on one of those levers and making those small tests to change, and looking for the outputs and outcome or the impact that we can have by working together differently. So really thankful for you all, this extra time on the call. Please continue to look for emails from us because we will continue to provide pre-work on these calls. And I look forward to seeing you next time. So thank you for hanging in. Thank you for staying at the table, and we'll see you again soon.